All right, so we were talking about how. Well, first let's start with what happened when Kennedy got elected, because you were born in the 50s and then you were really young when Kennedy did become president. So tell me about what Nana Allen did in particular, because that was an interesting story.
Yeah, I remember I was only 4 when Kennedy was elected and 5 on Inauguration Day. And so, what I remember about Inauguration Day is that my parents were moving that same day. And so, my brother and my sister and I went down to my grandmother's house, and she made us sit at 5. One 5-year-old, me, and my brother and sister were twins, they were 6. And we had to sit and watch the entire Kennedy inauguration, which to say for a 5-year-old to sit for hours and hours was not particularly fun. But I do remember that day. It snowed. We were from Baltimore, and of course the inauguration was in D.C. So it snowed there too, and it was a snowy day, and I remember them moving to our house that night, our new house.
So you said that part of the reason that Nana Allen made you watch the inauguration is because she was really excited because you guys were Catholic, and
Yes, my grandmother was extremely excited that this was the first Catholic president, and she was Catholic all her life, and so it was a very exciting time for many American Catholics to have a Catholic president.
the Kennedys were Irish and Nana Allen was Irish, so that was a factor, right?
Yes, my grandmother's last name was O'Reilly, and she was extremely excited to have an Irish Catholic president in the White House. She felt like her voice would be heard better than it had ever been heard before.
So had she voted in the previous presidential elections, or did she feel
I don't
like
think
it?
it's on me anymore, Nick.
Sorry, it is on you. Don't worry about that. But what had she voted in the previous presidential elections,
I
or?
believe she had always voted. I believe that was very important to my grandmother to vote.
But I guess the Kennedy election was more significant because this was the first time that a Catholic, let alone an Irish Catholic, had even really gotten the kind of momentum that Kennedy had gotten.
Well, I think the Kennedys were at that point already an iconic family that many, particularly Irish Catholics, held in high esteem. And so, yes, it was. It was particularly a happy time for my grandmother and my family.
Did your parents vote for Kennedy, or were they?
One parent voted for Kennedy, and the other parent voted for, I guess, Nixon had run against him. Or I don't really know who ran against him that time. Probably Nixon. And to this day, I still don't know who. I know you're not looking at me anymore.
I am. The camera's still on you. Go ahead.
So that's what I know.
So, what was the reaction when one of your parents voted for Nixon? Because it probably was not popular for since
My
both.
parents never discussed who voted for who. I just know one of my parents said one of us voted for this one and one of us voted for that one, and we always do that at elections, so we almost cancel each other out. So sometimes they wondered why they voted, but that's how my parents were. But they voted anyhow because they felt it was their duty as a U.S. citizen.
So there was no adverse reaction to the idea that an Irish Catholic was voting for Nixon when another Irish Catholic was running?
Since we don't know if the Irish Catholic voted for him, I can't tell you. Since nobody knew who, which I think is smart, not to tell people who you vote for, because it's really nobody's concern except your own unless you choose to share it, but you can guarantee that half of the population will not like your vote. So why get into it?
But both were Irish Catholics. That's what I don't understand.
Very little. My mother was very little Irish Catholic. My father was very much Irish Catholic.
I see. So what happened during the Bay of Pigs? What was the buzz in the family then?
I remember my parents not really sharing with us because a lot of parents didn't tell their children, but my older sister told me that there was going to be a war and that Cuba was going to nuke Washington, D.C., and since we were close to Washington, D.C., we would probably also die, so we'd have to sleep down in the basement that night. So I remember being very, very afraid of what was going on in Cuba.
So, what happened when you heard what the outcome was?
I just remember hearing that the problem had been averted, and so I was happy. But after that, I think that was my first awareness that the world that I was living in was not always a friendly, happy, go lucky place. And so I think that was my first encounter with the real world, and it was a little scary.
What about, was, my history is kind of bad on this one, but was the Bay of Pigs part of the Cuban Missile Crisis, or were those two different incidents, and what was your reaction to that particular event or aspect, if you will?
As far as I remember, the Bay of Pigs was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and what I do remember was that Khrushchev, I think, who was the president or whatever, premier or whatever in Russia, was arming Cuba and was working with Cuba to become a communist country. They used to be not communist. I don't really know what they were. I don't know if they were a monarchy or a democracy or what. I really don't know, but I know that Khrushchev was working, I guess with Castro, but I really don't know, to change the country to a communist country, and that was very threatening for the United States. And they armed them with nuclear weapons, or had said that they were going to arm them with nuclear weapons, which would have then put nuclear weapons capabilities within the boundaries of, they could have attacked the United States, and that was scary for people. And I know that that was kind of a I can't really say how to describe it, but it was kind of a show of power on the sides of the Russians. And if the United States had not reacted strongly, who knows how things would have gone.
So, in terms of the Bay of Pigs too, one of the things I was just thinking about is that there was a lot of anger with the way that Kennedy had handled the whole situation within the Cuban American community. Now, was there anger within the Irish Catholic community? Did they feel betrayed by Kennedy and how he handled it? Did they feel like, oh man, this guy really, deceived us? He can't handle.
I don't know, honey. I don't know. So I really don't have a clue how people felt. I just remember there being fantastic relief. It seemed to have been resolved in the favor of the United States, and so I think people were just happy that it was over.
So what happened when Kennedy was assassinated, and do you remember anything leading up to that? Like, had you heard rumors that people were worried that, oh, the president's gonna get shot or anything like that?
No, I was only, I think, in second or third grade. I can't remember, but I do remember that it was November 22nd, which was Saint Cecilia's feast day, and that's my name. So a little sister named Sister Marie Carmelita, she was well into her 80s, very old, very sweet, very kind and loving, and she wasn't really a teaching nun anymore. She was retired, but she lived at the convent where I went to school, and she had come over to give me a Happy Cecilia feast day, Saint Cecilia feast day card. So she called me out to the hallway, and she was very sweet, and I liked her a lot, and she liked me. And so we stood out there and talked after she gave me the card, but I could hear that the PA system they were using the PA system in the classroom, but I really couldn't hear what they were saying. I was out in the hallway and the door was closed. So after Sister Marie Carmelita and I talked for a little bit, I went back into the classroom, and I could tell that something very serious had happened because my teacher was crying and the kids were packing up, and so I asked her what happened, and she told me that our president had been shot. At that point, they did not think that he was dead, but that it looked very, very serious, and that they were going to excuse the children to go home.
So what happened when he did pass away, how did the mood suddenly change?
Well, I just remember there being a very dark, dark cloud over the country. I don't think anybody, even people who didn't like Kennedy, would not have wished that. That's not the American way. I remember watching the funeral. I remember very much seeing little John and Carolyn, and they were close to my age, and my heart just really going out to them. And thinking how horrible, horrible a thing like that is, that in a country where we value life and liberty, that someone would take a person's life and freedoms and not only his away, but drastically change the life of his family members. And it was a very sad time for me, a very sad time to realize that people could be like that.
And just for, I guess, kind of a side note, Nana Allen had passed away on June 17th of that year. And do you think that that was kind of a blessing, because it would have been hard for her to deal with that, especially since she really did like Kennedy, and because she was very well into her 80s at the time. She was 83.
I think it was hard on just about everyone. I think it would have been hard on her because she was feeling so good about him being president. And so just like, any of us, if we lost a president that we loved to a murderer, and in a way that was so shocking and unexpected. So I think it was just very sad. And yes, I'm sure she would have been very sad.
What do you think her reaction would have been like? Besides being sad, do you think she would have, for lack of a better term, had a literal heart attack, or just?
No, I just think she would have been extremely saddened and distressed and overwhelmed for a while, like most people were, but I don't think she would have had a heart attack or anything. She was a pretty strong woman. She went through a lot of stuff and survived way bigger things than that.
So what happened in the days, I guess, during and after the funeral? Were the conspiracy theories already abounding, or had you guys pretty much decided for yourselves that, okay, Lee Harvey Oswald did?
Well, the Lee Harvey Oswald, once he was captured, I remember I was very young at the time, so I don't know if there were conspiracy theories. I do remember when Lee Harvey Oswald was shot and killed by, I think his name was Jack Ruby,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I remember that, and so a lot of people saying that was so bad because now they wouldn't be able to find out why Oswald, or if Oswald was really. But I think people had a different level of respect for the office of the president, and so I don't think the conspiracy theories really came out for several years. It's a different world now than it was then. There was an amount of respect for the office. There was a different kind of respect for law enforcement, for keeping things private. Now, it's a very different world. Everything's exposed as quickly as it can be, even if it's not in the best interest of the country. I mean, look at WikiLeaks. And there just doesn't seem to be that respect anymore like there was back then. So I do not believe, but I can't say for certain because I was very young, I do not believe that the conspiracy theories were flying like they do now.
What happened when Robert Kennedy was beginning to run for his office, because he had been the Attorney General, and then he was running at a rally in California, and he'd been shot there?
Yes, I remember that too. That happened to be, I was going to a school named Our Lady of Victory, and that happened to be on the day of my school picnic.
So what happened? Did they give you all school that day as well, or was it like, it's just, it's just
No,
Robert?
it was horrible. It was horrible, and the country was stunned, absolutely stunned, because some people thought that Robert was even more qualified than President Kennedy. So they were looking forward to someone who had a lot of his brother's charisma and spirit, but also seemed to have a little bit more political savvy, so I think a lot of people were stunned, and most people felt for certain that he would be the next president of the United States. So it was a double whammy for the Kennedy family, and certainly a very sad time for America. Excuse me.
So then, with the two brothers already having been shot, then came a time where one of the Kennedy brothers caused one of their own problems and may have, according to some, may have killed someone. What was the reaction to that Ted Kennedy could have possibly killed Mary Jo Kopechne?
I remember that, not as well, of course, as the other two. I remember a lot of people having different feelings about that. You know, what was he doing with her? There were rumors that he was in an inappropriate relationship with her. So I remember that being a bit more sordid than the other two events. I remember that it was really kind of a black eye on the Kennedy family, because up until then they had been held in very high esteem, and that was a very questionable event. A lot of people had a lot of questions that didn't seem to get answered to their satisfaction, and perhaps there was cover up or special privileges given to Ted Kennedy because he was a Kennedy and the family had been through so much. And you know, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that one. I feel bad for Mary Jo Kopechne or Kopechne's family, because I don't feel like they feel like justice had ever been served. But I don't really know enough about that.
So what was your parents' reaction? What did they think, or did they not discuss that either?
No, my family really didn't discuss politics. I think because my parents were so polarized on politics, it was just something that they opted not to discuss in our family. But I certainly had plenty of opportunity to look at stuff. You know, things weren't held from us. We watched the news and we saw newspaper headlines, and but I'm very happy that we were allowed to form our own opinions, that I didn't have parents all of the same mindset indoctrinating me. I was given the opportunity to form my own opinions, and I find that to have been a very wonderful gift that I received.
Is that about the time when, speaking of political issues, is that about the time when Steve started getting involved in politics, or was that much later?
Steve who?
Steve D. Boy, the delegate.
Oh, I have no idea why or when Steve got involved in politics, honey. I really don't. I know he's my cousin, and I don't, but he's like a second or third cousin. I don't know him that well.
Okay.
You would have to ask Steve that.
Alright. But going back to, I guess, where you were at the time, so we're moving into the 70s and 80s here. Is that when all the Kennedy conspiracy theories started coming out?
Yeah, I would say it was somewhere during that time. I'm trying to think when I guess it was in the 70s when I first started hearing stories about relationships with Marilyn Monroe, and you know, who killed Marilyn Monroe and who killed the Kennedys, and was it all a big part of a conspiracy, and people started to write books, and I'll tell you the truth, I didn't pay much attention to that stuff, because when people are dead,
It's best just to leave them basically
yes,
dead.
and when they can't defend themselves, I feel like, you know, it's not really fair for people to you know, go out there, and I didn't see anyone trying to be positive. I saw people trying to be negative and trying to be and I think it hurt the family too. I think when I think of Carolyn Kennedy and John Kennedy, the children, and then all of Robert Kennedy's kids, and I just don't know what the benefit of that was. If there truly were other people that were involved in the murders of the Kennedys, then I would be interested in having that investigated. But if it was just to tear down two men that were no longer there to defend themselves, I just couldn't get into that. That holds no interest for me.
So did you go and see the Oliver Stone film? Or was that like, you know what, I'm not even interested in
I
that.
don't know what Oliver Stone film.
JFK.
No, I did not.
Hang on. Michelle, stop. Anyway, so as you've followed the Kennedys over the years, to what extent that you have, what do you think about the whole family legacy?
I think that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think that there were things that the Kennedys did that they did out of, having the power to do it and not having the strength of character or faith to do it any differently. So that's one thing that I think. I also think they were just people like you and me, and we probably would do many similar things. So I feel my heart goes out to that family. There has been a lot of suffering in that family. And it just makes you wonder, if they had just been an ordinary family, if they would have suffered all the death and angst and murder and drugs that the children, one of Jack Kennedy's, or Robert Kennedy's children actually died of a drug overdose. And so I just think, sometimes all that power and all that money works against you, not for you.
Did your siblings have any views on this that they discussed, or were they like your parents, just wanting to, maybe mention it, but then that was it? You didn't talk about it much otherwise?
I'm sure that my siblings have had a lot of different views on it. I have siblings in law enforcement who I'm sure studied it just to understand the dynamics of the Kennedy murders. So I've heard different opinions over the year. It's just an area I choose not to go into any depth for. It's not something that that's of huge interest to me. And again, both those guys are dead and gone, and I don't particularly believe that we're going to benefit by investigating it any further.
So I guess moving into the 90s and 2000s, JFK Jr. died in a plane crash. What was the reaction to that? Like, in your family, how did you react? How did your mom react? How did your siblings react?
Well, I remember I thought it was an extremely sad event. Again, here was another Kennedy tragedy. I had thought John was a very good guy, it seemed, in many ways. Again, the money thing, he wouldn't have had a plane if he hadn't had all that money, and so just really made me think a lot about how we think money is such a wonderful thing, and yet it can end up being a disaster. But I remember thinking how tragic that was. He was a bright and handsome young man. His wife was with him, his wife's sister. So, again, another Kennedy, another tragedy. And I think it's heartbreaking, all the tragedy that they've been through. And my heart goes out to Caroline, who, watched her dad die the way he did, watched her mother in a relationship with a guy who maybe wasn't the best for her after that. And then watching her mother die of cancer, and then seeing her own brother die in such a tragic way.
By the way, going back to Jacqueline Kennedy real quick, what was your reaction when she started getting into the relationships after Kennedy, for example, with Onassis?
Well, I remember thinking that she and Jack looked like the perfect couple, and I just remember admiring her so much as the First Lady. She was so dignified and seemed to have a lot of class, and seemed to be a stabilizing force for Jack Kennedy. So I really can't say that I felt happy when she married Onassis, because it seemed like it was maybe for the wrong reasons, maybe for a sense of security that she had lost. But I just, after seeing her with Jack Kennedy and I just didn't see her with Aristotle and Onassis. So that was just me. Hopefully she was happy. I don't know.
What about your siblings and your mom? How did they?
I don't think anybody liked her marrying him.
Well, I don't know how relevant this is, but I read a quote where she had said the first time you marry for love, the second time you marry for money, and the third time is friendship. Now that you know that, does your attitude change at all in regards to that?
Well, I don't believe that. So I think the first time you marry for love, the second time you marry for love, and the third time you marry for love. So if your spouse dies, or if you find yourself in a situation to marry again, so to marry for money is very mercenary to me, and but I would think that only came out of a depth of hurt, that perhaps she loved John so much that when he died, she never wanted to be in that position again.
And especially because, as we all found out later, because he had hurt her in many ways when he was alive.
Perhaps. I don't know if she knew what was going on. I don't know if what they said was going on is all true. But I do know that she probably did feel hurt by him at times, because I think every person is hurt by their spouse at sometimes. But I also think that she was very deeply hurt when he died, and in a sense left her.
What was your reaction when Ted Kennedy died, because you had seen him go from a senator to the guy who had possibly murdered Mary Jo Kopechne to this notorious playboy, besides the whole thing with Mary Jo Kopechne, of course, to, he had been the Lion of the Senate, and then now the Camelot dynasty had just ended.
Well, I was never a big fan of Ted Kennedy. I believe that he was given that position myself because he was a Kennedy. I don't think he was a particularly great senator. I do think his brothers were. I don't think he was a great dad, and I don't think he was a great husband. So I know a lot of people loved him, and more power to them, but I did not share that love for Ted Kennedy. Now, it's still sad when someone dies, especially when he leaves children, but I believe that he lived a very easy life in a lot of ways. I mean, he did have to deal with the Kennedy legacy and all the death, but he certainly had plenty of wealth and plenty of caretakers. So a fortunate life, I guess, would be best to say, in a way. He never had to want for anything. He seemed to live life on his terms. So I was sad more for the family, and I pray that he knew the Lord and is in heaven with him.
And did you really want to watch the funeral, or did you kind of watch parts of it? Because I was like, I was able to recognize that was a big event, and I'm like, come on, Mom, come on, Michelle, you guys want to watch this? Were you like, oh, here we go again, or was it just like, okay, at least she's recognizing the significance?
I'm not one to, I like to watch events for a little bit and then move on. I'm not a television watcher, have never been a television watcher. Even for the royal wedding, which was a happy, wonderful, beautiful event, I probably caught 15-20 minutes of it on TV. Inaugurations, whether I like who's getting into office or not, I might watch 15-20 minutes. And so with Ted Kennedy's funeral, I caught pieces of it. I thought it was a significant event. But like all TV, which I think is a time waster and a mind killer, I watched just for a few minutes and then I moved on.
When you did watch, what parts of the Kennedy funeral you did see, and when you read the articles and stuff, did it bring up old memories for you? Like with some of the stuff that you're recalling to me right now? Did it bring up that, hey, you lived through this, you'd seen the Kennedy dynasty become what they become?
A lot of things bring that up. Anytime you hear the Kennedy name, you can't help but think of Camelot, the magic years of the White House, the very handsome, charismatic John Kennedy and his beautiful wife and their two children, and then the tragedy of the murder, the assassination of our president. So that all is a very sad memory, but a very, very vivid memory. Even though I was young, I can still see little John saluting when the coffin was carried by. I can remember just the profound sadness in the country. So that, and I remember when Lyndon Baines Johnson was sworn in, and I remember, and I don't know why, but I do remember that Jackie Kennedy was there at the swearing, and maybe she even held the Bible. I can't remember exactly, but I remember that. So, yeah, I have a lot of memories around the Kennedys. I very much related to the Robert Kennedys because I think there were either 9 or 11 kids, I can't remember, but we were a large Catholic family also, and so there was a real ability to relate to what those kids had been feeling. And then I ended up losing my dad 5 years later, so I had a very there was a real personal feeling that I could understand the pain that those Kennedy kids went through.
Well, okay, the camera's about to run out here, and thanks for your time, and thank you for sharing the memories.
You're welcome, Nikki. I love you.
All right, happy Mother's Day.
Thank you, baby. Bye-bye.